First, I want to say, Alpha, thank you. My right arm, Betty, that I've known forever, for this invitation. I grew up in Memphis, so I'm familiar with the state of Tennessee. And the only time I knew anything about Morristown was my former pastor retired in Morristown. And worshiping yesterday at Bethel, I saw his picture. So he had pastored Bethel United Methodist Church. I want to applaud the superintendent and all of these wonderful students. My God, the artwork, and I've been looking at, I'm not going to point any out, but some of them just take my breath away. The creativity of our young people. That choir, my God, wonderful voices to sing for our God. And the essays, today happens to be somebody's birthday, I'm sure. Not Dr. King's birthday, but it's the day we celebrate his birthday. We celebrate that life of who Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was. For some, it's a day of service. For some, it's a day of remembrance. For some, it's a day that they take to the streets and they march all over our country. And for some, it's a day simply to educate ourselves on the history and on the knowledge of who this great man was. We remember the conviction of Martin Luther King Jr. that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by those that have been oppressed. We remember Martin's insight that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we have to keep that in our heads, because when brothers and sisters are suffering across the borders, they could be us. And if we have to go back to where our ancestry started, are there any Native Americans in the room? You would be the only one here, because none of us came from this country. We have all migrated in. We remember Dr. King by the Montgomery bus boycott, his first assignment to civil rights. We remember his famous speech in Selma. No one will ever forget the I Have a Dream speech that was made in Washington in 1963. But we need to know more about who this giant was. He challenged the war in Vietnam, which was probably the most important thing that the government stood up and fought against in statements that he made against a war that a lot of us never understood why. And challenging Vietnam, Dr. King stepped over the line. It was okay for Martin to join and gather with black clergy and white concerned citizens all over the world. That was no threat to America. But then he started dreaming about a second Poor People's Campaign, a campaign that would bring Native Americans together, Hispanic Americans, poor whites, and black families that have struggled with equality for hundreds and hundreds of years. He can gather all of those folks in Washington in 1963. And the government and our country started saying, my God, what if that number quadruples around the world with all of these other groups? And now you're talking about the war in Vietnam. He became a threat to our country. I will never forget the night before. As I sat in a temple that could seat 5,000 folks, and folks were standing up and squatting down in the aisles. If the fire department had shown up, they would have made everyone that was not seated leave. And Dr. King was scheduled to speak, but it was a tornado watch out. And so they said to him by phone, Doc, don't worry about it. We got it. We got it covered. The church was packed. Packed. And if you can find the album, y'all young folks, that's that big round thing that you put on the thing and you think, they have it on CD. You can hear the thunder and the lightning crashing in the background. And that evening, Dr. King was not present. But that was okay, because usually the dignitaries didn't come on the platform until right before they spoke. Everyone that spoke eulogized Martin King. Started from Ben Sampson, a young clergy in Chicago that talked about how he heard Dr. King and how Martin King changed his life. And the roll call kept coming, because now the phone call has been made saying, Doc, get up. You got to get here. It's a packed house. And so we're really killing time, but nobody knew it. Finally, Abernathy gets up, and he talks about his running buddy, the person that he stood behind. He talked about messages that he actually wrote for Dr. King and probably never got credit for. He eulogized Dr. King. And then amazingly, when the king walked into the room and took over the mic, he started talking about his life, and he eulogized himself. I'll never forget him talking about the Good Samaritans. And he talked about how so often on the Jericho Road, how people would be battered and left on the side to die. And he talked about the Levite, the one we would have expected to go over and help the brother. But he jokingly said, well, maybe he didn't take that time because he had to go to a Jericho Improvement Association meeting to help organize something. And so rather than get bogged down with checking on this man on the side of the road, he just simply crossed over and kept going. And so the first question he said that the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? And he said maybe that should have been a reverse question. Because when the Good Samaritan came by, it was, if I don't stop to help this brother, what's going to happen to him? And brothers and sisters, that's where we are today. If we don't start stopping to help people that we know and don't know and don't want to know, what's going to happen to them? But the other side to that puzzle is that we mostly call ourselves Christians. And that's something internally you have to cope with. When you read the next day in the newspaper that that brother on the side of the road died, and somebody steps up and says, but if somebody had just been concerned and stopped and got him medical care, he would have survived. That somebody may have been me that didn't stop. I hope that somebody is not you that didn't stop, but ride on the fact that maybe the brother or sister on the side of the road is somebody that you love and cherish, and nobody stopped to care about them. My young man said he couldn't be silent anymore. And I challenge young folks, basketball team, and all of your singers that are not in the room, that when you're, my little people, when you're in school and some child says to you, I got a gun in the locker, tell somebody that looks taller than you. Don't tell your friend. Go to the office sick with a stomach ache and you need to call mama and tell the folks in that office, John said, he might be lying, but John said he got a gun. I am so tired of hearing the news where they interview our kids and they said, yeah, he's been acting strange all week. He said he had a gun. We knew he had a gun, but we did absolutely nothing. And they lived to tell that story. But if they had told that story the day before or the days before, those that were shot to death could live to say, because you told, all of us are still breathing. We cannot be silent. We cannot continue to act like things are not happening. This country we live in today, I don't get it. I don't get it at all. I struggle for, God knows how, I'm old, y'all. I can't keep fighting, but I can't shut up. And I ask God sometimes to silence my tongue. We are children of the same God. God sees us all the same way. Why can't we live in harmony? Why are we so caught up with what we have? It's okay to have, but don't be so caught up with not wanting others to have something. It's hard to survive today. And I encourage you. I'm reading a book called Radical Disciples, and I can't even think of the author of it. But in that book, it talked about homeless ministry. And it says, yes, it is. We can pat, Mayor said he needed a pat on his back earlier. We can pat each other on our backs, though. And we can stand proud and say, I took food, and I'm not knocking that because they need to have soup. They need to have nourishment. If you got a shower here, they need to be able to come in and take a shower. That's their baptism. They're remembering that baptism again because they can't get showers on the street. Every city ought to have, where homeless people live, accommodations and bathrooms for them. But we will give food and we will take blankets. And once again, don't misinterpret. I take blankets. I feed every third Monday Our church does it. It's a wonderful mission. But on that Jericho road, do we need to change the narrative of what's happening on that road so no one down the road gets battered and mugged and murdered? If it's happening all the time, if we got homelessness all the time, why can't we turn hotels that no longer function into buildings, not by the government, but by our churches and our human concern for God's brothers and sisters of ours, into living quarters so they can sleep, those that desire to, so they can eat, and all of them desire to eat. But we have to take gigantic, larger steps than what we've been taking around our country. And yes, the government does a lot, and then the government does nothing. And then we get somebody else, and the government does a little bit, then the government does nothing again, and God only knows if we keep depending on the government. How many of you got here today because of the government? Nobody. You got here today because of your mama, your daddy, or your grandparents, or your uncle and aunt said they don't know how to raise children, so they snatched you into their hearts and they raised you. And then your pastors, some of your professors, some of your next door neighbors. But somebody pulled you up to where you are today. And you should thank God every day. I'm going to close in a second because Alpha told me I had 2 minutes. I think about love. And shamefully, when I witnessed Dr. King's assassination, I knew none of my people did that. I knew probably it was white folks that did it. I didn't think the Native Americans were really mad at him about nothing. And the Hispanics weren't complaining about what he was standing up and doing. And so I had nobody else to blame. And you know, when you get mad, you got to put it on somebody because you got to justify why you're mad. And so it was white folks. All white folks, except about 10 that I knew. And I didn't know a lot of white folks because it was black people in the movement. But the white folks that were in the movement, I loved them. 10. And that summer, 68, my pastor said to my mother, my middle name is Jean. He always called me Clara Jean. And he said, Clara needs to get out of Memphis. And today we provide counselors at schools for our young people after shootings. After a football player dies in a car accident, counselors are at the school. We academically need to support counseling at schools because things are happening in our lives that we need help with. I needed help. I didn't know I needed help because I was hating. And so I had an answer for whatever I thought I needed. So I ended up going to the United Methodist Church to a place called Lake Ozark, Missouri, where it's a tourist little strip, and it was none but white folks. And so I get there and I say, okay, God, what's up? But there's a military base, and so every now and then I saw a black face. And I was going, hey, we still alive. In July, Robert Kennedy was assassinated when I was in Mississippi, Lake Ozark, Missouri. And I went through another level of total depression. And I'm living at a site with Methodist white people that I ended up falling totally in love with. Their 2 children, and him and his wife. But there was this little girl. Betty wanted me to share this. There was this little girl, and she had long hair, and I would go up, she would pass me every day, and I would say, "Hey, what's your name?" And she grabbed her dad's leg. And so I don't like you anyway, hey, because you're the color of the people that took Dr. King's life, probably took Kennedy's life. I didn't know, but I was angry. But it was like children didn't bother me. It was like I saw a little hope in children. And then this little girl is turning that hope around because she don't want to speak to me. And so I'm like, yeah, you're gonna say something eventually. And so every day that I saw her, she would almost walk up her daddy's chest to get away from me. And so I said, okay, they done taught you well. You know not to hang out or touch or look at black folks. And I'm going like, where is this world going today with children's attitudes like that? And so every Sunday, we would take a boat out to the campgrounds for worship. And this little girl was at one of the campsites. Once again, nothing. The day before they left the city, they were there for 2 weeks. The day before they left the city, they were coming down the strip. And I see her and I'm waving, and she runs up and almost climbs up my leg. And her dad had said to her, "There's your friend." And I'm like looking behind me because for 2 weeks there's been no communication. And she runs over and grabs me. And I picked her up and she hugs my neck. And her dad comes over and said, "Come on, we need to head back because we're packing. We're headed back home." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I'm thinking like it took 2 weeks, but love happens. May take a while. And then the father said, "Can I hug you?" And that was like, yeah, I don't know about this. But raised the right way, I allowed that contact. And he whispered in my ear. He said, "Thank you." Okay. "Thank you?" And he said, "Yes, I want to tell you something. My daughter is 5. And she was raped about 3 weeks ago by a mentally disturbed black man. He's about 18, 19. He said the counselor, I couldn't afford one, but they took her to a counselor. And the counselor said to them, "Get her out of this atmosphere. Take her somewhere calm and peaceful. Let her inhale and exhale and talk to her every day about loving." And so they brought her to Lake Ozark, Missouri. And they had a little trailer park that they stayed in and right on the water, beautiful sight. And he said, "I didn't want my daughter to grow up hating black people, all black people, because of what happened to her." And I was like, I hate all white folks. And this man's child has been sexually abused by a grown person. The pain I'm envisioning that little 5-year-old girl had to go through in that rape. And they did not want her to grow up hating anybody. And because they were talking to her for 2 weeks, she's a lady. She seems to be really nice. It'd be okay for you to hug her. But the little girl was digesting every time she saw me, the pain that she had to have gone through for those minutes or seconds that took place in her life. And the last night, they convinced her, if you see her tomorrow, you need to let her know you're her friend. A 5-year-old girl started turning my life around. It's not none of y'all that assassinated, I hope, that assassinated or had something to do with Dr. King's assassination. There were white folks that marched with us, that picketed with us, that spoke out against injustices. I can't continue to hate. Hate multiplies hate. Violence multiplies violence. And love can multiply love. And Jesus' command was that we love our enemies and our neighbors as we love ourselves. So let's start loving ourselves more so that we can open our hearts to love those we don't know or we don't like. We must discover the power that love holds, the redemptive power of love. And when we discover that, we will be able to make this old world into a new world that we could never imagine it could look like. May God walk with you. May God open your hearts. May God open your mouth. May God use you to be the hands and feet of our Lord and Savior, Jesus the Christ. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.